Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette. We're so glad you're with us to stay curious. Today with Mr. Steve Agid. Welcome, Steve.
Nice to be here, Mark.
Well, we appreciate you spending one day a month with us here in our studio. You have got a fabulous program together today that I see by the slides you've worked really hard on.
Yeah, and it's been a lot of fun, and I'm sure the audience is going to have a lot of fun with the program as well.
Well, if you're baby boomer, you know you will.
Absolutely.
Because I can't wait to just sit back and listen to Steve's program all about how science fiction of the last century has influenced today's space programs. That's just a lot of great parallels, a lot of cool flashbacks to the way it was, the great old movies. And thank you, Steve Jokums, for this beautiful green screen model of Forbidden Planet, one of the great science fiction movies of all time. It's certainly on the top of my list.
Mine too.
And the Krell and all that good stuff. And you get to see the actress. Who's the actress in that?
Anne Francis.
Anne Francis, yes.
And we'll be talking about it later.
The gorgeous Anne Francis swims nude in the movie, okay? How can you forget that as a
Oh.
young boy watching that movie? Just like the Tarzan movies, okay, in there. So strap on, sit back, get you a beverage just like I have here so I can sit back and enjoy Steve's program here. Steve's done several programs with us. He is a communicator out to Kennedy Space Center. You might be going in there, a local person, hear his voice booming in the rocket garden or introducing an astronaut. Tell us a little bit about your job out there.
Well, we're part of what's called the communicator group, and our job is to pretty much explain the space program to the general public. Part of the things we do is we take the general public on these special interest tours. Those are special bus tours. We'll do the launch countdowns during many of the launches that we support during the park hours. We do special programs in the Atlantis exhibit, the Rocket Garden, and in addition to that, places, at the Saturn V facility, which is part of the bus tour. And we provide that way to link the general public with the astronauts. We have 2 astronaut programs every day of the year. We serve as the question and answers, the hosts, and we do a lot of special presentations. In fact, we have one tomorrow that is on women in space. So it's a lot of fun to see the general public come face to face with things that they read about in the newspaper or saw on television.
Well, you do a great job. How many years you worked out there, Steve?
Well,
You're a space worker with the shuttle era.
Yeah. Last April, a year ago, I was 50 years in the space program.
Awesome.
Coming up on 8 years of working out there at the Visitor Center, and that's meeting thousands of guests over the years, and it's just been an awful lot of fun.
Well, your friend and mine, Bart Martindale's another supporter of our museum that we all came on the Space Coast about the same time 7 years ago. Marty was out there. Marty Winkel, my co-producer, a shout out to him, doing today's show behind our Streamlabs. He was out there and saw Nicole Stott and Barbara Morgan as part of that program today. And we also have Logan Cope here. Logan Cope is a intern for us from Eastern Florida State College. So thank you, Logan, for learning a little bit about our crazy world here in the podcast. So we wanted to mention to everybody out there that our humble nonprofit's always looking for your donations. Here's a group from a tour group bus coming in there that frequently comes in there into our front of our museum there. And these are the type of things that are great cash flow for us, these bus tours in here. There's the promo I did for Steve. Steve, a picture of you there I'll make small just to show people. He walks around the Saturn V with a remote speaker on his shoulder. I bought one after seeing you do that for my astronomy presentations.
Oh,
it works really fine.
Oh, it's wonderful.
On there, and you don't have to raise your voice, although I'm a loud voice, I'm told, all the time. You do such a fabulous job out there as everybody does. So let me kick it off for you, my friend. You just tell me when to advance the slide. Now sit back and enjoy Science Fiction, Inspiration for Spaceflight by Steve Agid.
Now, I'm hoping that a lot of the folks that are watching today were about the same age as we are. But for those that are younger, wondering, why do we need inspiration for spaceflight? That should be so natural. Well, there was a time when spaceflight was not natural. In fact, it was considered crazy. And we're going to go start at the very, very beginning of human history and go all the way up to almost the present day, talking about all these things that have happened that once started in the human mind.
Okay.
In fact,
Please,
even, yeah,
I just want to say, please hold your questions for the end. We also got some beautiful more models, like this one by Steve Jokums and his business. I got to show his patch there. We love Steve and his contributions to the museum. That's his Lake County Spaceport, where you can buy decals for your for your models on there. Also, we're aware of it. 516 is the launch for the Falcon Heavy. We're not going to rush through this, but we might say, hey, we're going to go out and see the launch. However, it's only 30% chance of going on
Right.
time. There's a 2-hour window. There are clouds rolling in from the west. So we will monitor that for you all that are watching it, maybe on Space Flight Now or other venues there. So thank you for letting me interrupt you there. I wanted to take care of that little bit of business. Take it away, Steve.
okay. So I started off with a picture showing one of the first tried to be honest science fiction movies called Destination Moon from 1950, and put that right next to Starship, which is Elon Musk's craft that will land astronauts on the moon in just, we hope, just a few years, showing the similarities between the two. Now, let's begin with the very beginning, and that's going to start with the distant past, all the way back to Greek mythology with Icarus and Daedalus. Icarus and Daedalus. Daedalus is the father, Icarus the son. They'd want to fly and escape. And Daedalus gives a warning to Icarus, his son, don't fly too close to the sun because the wax on the wing is going to melt and you're going to die. Well, history records as Icarus as dying, but Daedalus made it successful. So the idea is people wanted to learn how to fly. And again, that's in the time of the ancient Greeks. Johannes Kepler comes up with the laws of orbit dynamics. He wrote a book about what it would be like to look at the Earth from the moon way back in 1634. And it was called The Dream or Somnambulum. And then we come to what is the very first, in my mind and others, real science fiction. It's the type of thing that a Michael Crichton would have written now. And that was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now, Frankenstein came out on January 1st, 1818. I'm going to tell you the story of how Mary Shelley decided to write this book. On January 18th of 1803, a murderer named George Forster was hanged. Well, an Italian scientist, Giovanni Aldini, was given the body after the blood was completely taken out for a public demonstration. Now, Aldini connected up battery cable to this dead body. And after he did that, he checked all the muscles, connected the cables, activated his battery, and the legs, arm, and trunk started to move, and the eyes of this dead murderer opened up. Now, the odd thing about this, the fellow that brought the body, Mr. Pass, ended up having a heart attack. So it looked like the guy that was hanged, it looks like he was coming back to life, but the guy that brought the body over, he died. So now, you say, well, that's an interesting story, but we know that the muscles are controlled by electrical impulses, so the fact that you're dead, the muscles are still going to respond. However, Mary Shelley, upon learning about that, said, wait a minute, and that's what a lot of science fiction is. Take a look at something we have now and try to extrapolate a little bit about it. If you can animate body parts using electricity, maybe you could do it for a whole body. And to get the parts, you go to a graveyard, you dig up arms here and legs here, assemble the body, and use a lot of electricity from thunder and lightning to animate the whole body. Now, that's essentially the story of Frankenstein, using electricity to animate a body, all from this experiment with this murderer way back in 1803, 15 years before the book. Now, where does the science come out of this? Well, it turns out there was an American engineer named Earl Bakken. He loved the movie Frankenstein, watched it many times as a kid, and it just never left him, this electrical energy and the muscles, electrical energy and the muscles. wait a minute, people have heart attacks. There's something wrong with their hearts. What would happen if there was a machine that you could wear that could send electrical impulses to your heart if your heart stopped?
Oh.
And he did that with the University of Minnesota, creating the first battery-operated heart pacemaker. I saw a picture of it. It was very big, probably looks like about 7 or 8 inches by 7 or 8 inches, and you wore it on your chest.
Wow. That was what year?
That was in the 1958. So you're
Okay.
talking about almost 70 years ago. But the point is, it worked. Now, of course, as time goes on, you make things smaller. Now you implant them in the body, but the science was still there. You use electricity, just like Mary Shelley did with Frankenstein, except now you make the heart beat with a regular rhythm. And it's all because of this engineer who loved the movie Frankenstein.
And inspired by it, a
And was
true
inspired by it.
inspiration there. All right. Go to the next.
Okay, the dawn of science. Now, up until the mid-1800s, we had the story about Frankenstein, but going into space, that was still pretty far in the future. We had many stories about it in mythology, but there were people that had dreams. There were swans that would elevate people to the moon. Just not very realistic. Then came Jules Verne. He decided to talk to scientists and figure out what would it actually take to go to the moon. Well, he invented his craft. And what I did in a previous show here, we had for the Apollo 8, when we had the 55th anniversary of Apollo 8, and I did the program here, I compared what Jules Verne did with what Apollo 8 did. His first trip from the Earth to the moon, the crew didn't land. Apollo 8 didn't land. He had a crew of 3. Apollo 8 had a crew of 3. He launched in the month of December. Apollo 8 launched in the month of December. The spacecraft in Jules Verne's story was mostly made out of aluminum. Apollo 8 was mostly made out of aluminum. It landed in the Pacific Ocean. Apollo 8 landed in the Pacific Ocean. It launched halfway down the coast of Florida. Of course, Verne thought it'd be the West Coast, and it was the East Coast. And this book was written as the American Civil War was ending, 1865. So way back, 103 years before Apollo 8, this Frenchman predicted it would be the Americans that would send a spacecraft to the moon first. And one of my favorite examples of really quick thinking is it was a 3-man crew. And the fellow that was in charge was a fellow named Barbican. In real life, it was Borman. Second in command was a fellow named Nickel. Second in command was a fellow named Lovell. And third in command was a Frenchman named Andon. Third in command was Anders, an American of French descent. So that is pretty good for 103 years in the future.
And of course, Lovell's still alive. Anders and Borman aren't. Just lost. So many parallels, even more than what you talk about there when you look at the so forth. From Earth to the Moon, I love that one too. Is another great movie. So
and the things that were most important were the reentry speed and the takeoff speed. What do we need to do that? He used the actual equations that scientists would use. Those don't change over time, but he put those into the book. And that's what made it so interesting. The flight to the moon, how long it would take to get back, what the entry speed would be. So it was all, trying to be very, very realistic about this.
of course, Jules Verne known for other
Absolutely.
adventure movies
right,
or London. I mean, novels, of course, like the
Journey to the Center of the Earth, for example. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Yeah.
And he always used the science, didn't he?
Always try to use the science.
Huh.
Now, people always say, what's the difference between, they get the two confused. Oh, there's Herbert George Wells or H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. Well, if you look at the books, Verne's are probably more optimistic about whatever it was that he was inventing. H.G. Wells more pessimistic. Something starts off as a great idea, and it just doesn't turn out that way.
Like Martians coming to
like
Earth.
Martians coming to Earth. Yeah, there you go.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, we love Robert Goddard, Marty and I. Tell you that right now.
Now, the Robert Goddard story, a very interesting story. Robert Goddard grows up in Massachusetts. He has a family that goes way back in the Massachusetts history. And they're farmers. The Goddards have been farmers, and they're always going to be farmers. Well, Robert Goddard really didn't want to be a farmer. So what do you want to do? Well, he didn't really want to know. But he did know what he didn't want to do, and he didn't want to be a farmer. Well, there was a kind of a little family discussion, and that didn't work out well. And Robert Goddard, on October 17th of 1899, went outside and climbed a cherry tree in his backyard. And he took some reading material. And the reading material he took was something called Pearson's Magazine. I just so happened to have the 1897 edition of Pearson's Magazine right there. You think of this as a hardcover book. But if you open that up, and we have the marker for it, and it's on that slide, you'll see what he read, which was this new H.G. Wells story called War of the World. A little bit lower down. There you go. War of the Worlds. Now, there we go. Now, he called this his inspirational moment because he said when he came down the cherry tree.
140-year-old book.
There you
folks.
go. Absolutely.
Yeah.
When he came down the tree, he said he came down a different boy than the boy that went up.
Wow.
Because when he looked in the horizon, the planet Mars was rising. And he thought in that one moment how wonderful it would be to go to Mars. And I will dedicate my life to do that. And every year from that day forward, he recorded in his diary anniversary day of when that dream actually began. Now, if you want to look at the War of the Worlds, how did this classic science fiction story start? This is how it started. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man and yet as mortal as his own. And that's the way War of the Worlds sucked this man, Robert Goddard, in. Now, a great part of that story with Robert Goddard we'll talk about in just a few minutes. So let's go to the next slide. And Robert Goddard, this man that wanted to go to Mars, let's look at what he did. He unfortunately got on the wrong side of the New York Times. It did a nice editorial on him, talking about that he didn't have the knowledge that common high school students have, that everybody knows you can't use rockets in a vacuum because there's nothing to push against. Well, Goddard ended up leaving Massachusetts and started living in the Southwest where he did his experiments. So what kind of experiments would he did? He did a lot of experiments on rocketry. This is just a list of some of the things he did. He explored the practicality of using rocket propulsion to reach high altitudes, even as far as the moon. Did that in 1912. He proved that rockets would work in a vacuum, even though there was nothing to push against. He developed and fired the first liquid fuel rocket. Up till then, rockets were solid fuel, like fireworks. You couldn't throttle them. Once they started burning, they burned to completion. You couldn't turn them on and off. First to send a scientific payload into flight, and that was in 1929. He used vanes to control the actual rocket. We would call it the fins on the bottom. Developed a gyro system that he could use for rocket flights. He received patents for multi-stage rockets. When you fire a rocket up, you don't need that first stage after the fuel is gone. Get rid of it. The less rocket you have to take up, the faster you can go. So the idea of a multi-stage rocket was his as well. He developed pumps for the rocket fuel, motors and pivots on gimbals to steer the rocket engines. So these are just some of the things that this fella did. Now, one of my favorite Robert Goddard stories has to do with after he died. And his big goal was to go to Mars. Unfortunately, he died in 1945. His wife, Esther Goddard, lived considerably longer. And she got to meet people like Wernher von Braun. And it turns out the government never thought much of any of his patents. Turned out his patents were actually very valuable. So they decided they should really pay the Goddard family for all these things that he invented. So they gave Esther Goddard a check for $1 million. And
Wow.
she said, and that's again, this is in 1960, and $1 million was $1 million back in 1960. She said it's not enough. I thought, you need more money? No, I don't want any more money. Then what do you want? I want Bob's name to be remembered. And the way to remember it, I want NASA to do is name one of its laboratories after my husband Robert. And thus began the Goddard Space Flight Center. That's from the Goddard Space Flight Center. We now do things like Hubble research. That's where these spacecraft are controlled from. Now, one of my favorite stories. This is one of those. If you're not touched by this story, then nothing else will. When Viking 1 landed on Mars, it was July 20th of 1976. Just happened to be the 7th anniversary of the moon landing. Esther Goddard was invited to get to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And so when Viking 1 landed on Mars and took the first picture of the surface, Esther Goddard was there, asked the question, "What do you think?" And she said, "Robert would have loved it." So he didn't get to see the Mars landing. His wife did.
What a great story. Of course, Carl Sagan was there.
Yeah.
And Stone and all
Ed
the
Stone,
great,
who just passed away, yeah.
just passed away, the director of JPL for many years. We're enjoying this conversation with Steve Agid, frequent contributor to the American Space Museum's Stay Curious program. This is all about science fiction. We're just getting to the good stuff.
Okay, now, as time went on, now we're talking about the early 1920s, there was going to be a resurgence. Well, you've heard about H.G. Wells. He was selling books. Jules Verne passed away in 1905, so no more books coming out of Jules Verne. But there was this hunger for looking ahead, looking to the future. And so a brand new magazine came out, and I took a picture of the front cover of this, called A New Sort of Magazine. And that's about looking into the future, writing stories about what could be. A lot of people say, well, what exactly is science fiction? Well, science fiction is the literature of ideas. And how do science fiction writers come up with ideas? Well, the idea is they look at a current trend and they make it go a little bit further. What could happen if we do this? And then this happens and this happens, and write a story about that. And Amazing Magazine was one of the very first to do that. It was followed shortly after by another magazine called Astounding. And Astounding Magazine has been renamed Analog way back in 1960, still being published today, still with a lot of the same authors. Some of the authors, when they submitted their earlier stories, one of them I know in particular, just recently, Kip Thorne, got a Nobel Prize. So again, people used to think of science fiction as what you call the BEMS, the bug-eyed monsters. But no, it's the idea is there's a lot more to it than that. But this is the very, very beginning. Having these magazines that were out once a month, they competed with things like the Detective magazine and the other fantasy magazines. But the idea is we're coming up with different types of stories. Now, I do have a Amazing Magazine. This one is from 28. Yeah, this is from 1928, a real edition of it. And you'll notice the stories are by H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. So these magazines were very, very large prints, and they had ads in the back. But these were very much in the general public. You can go to your local newsstand and get these magazines. And they had stories of what some people called super science. Look at the science of today. Make whatever it is smaller. If it's small, make it bigger. And go on from there and see what you can do with the future. Write tales that were hopeful, write tales that were depressing, but explore all these different possibilities. And that's what science fiction generally is.
And I'll teach you real magic.
There you go.
There on the back there, professional magic there. I love those. Sucker for all that stuff there. That's a great
Again,
issue
so that's
there.
1928. So if you look at that, almost 100 years old. Moving on, we have Wernher von Braun. Now, Wernher von Braun, probably best known for the Saturn V moon rocket and our trip to the moon, helping us to recover from the shock of the Soviet Sputnik. Well, he came up with his idea. He wanted to go into the rocket business as well. Well, in 1929, at this point, von Braun is 15 years old. He's born in 1912, just 3 weeks before the Titanic sank. And a brand new movie came out, Frau im Mond, The Woman in the Moon. Now, he saw this movie about a rocket ship going to the moon and carrying a crew. Now, that was absolutely fascinating. Again, this is a motion picture. It was a silent film, so it just had music in the background. But Warner Braun was so impressed with it, he decided, if you can build this for a movie, you probably could build a real kind of a rocket. Now, the movie itself was not about a dream, was not about some odd premonition that somebody had. It had a real live science advisor, and that man would be called Herman Oberth. He was a science advisor for the movie. Now, if you look at the slide to the right, it is the first V2 that, at the bottom of the first V2 that Warner von Braun made. Right at the bottom of the base section, you can see the movie logo from Frau im Mond, to pay tribute to what inspired him to go into the rocket business.
That's so
and it's on that first V2 rocket. Now, he was so interested in science fiction and what types of things science fiction can bring up, what kind of inspiration you can get, that the American science fiction magazine we talked about a minute ago, Astounding Magazine, he was so concerned that he'd miss an issue. And again, this is during the Second World War, that he had the issues of Astounding Magazine sent to Sweden, and then a friend of his in Sweden would send them to him so he could keep track of all the new developments in science fiction right in the middle of World War II.
Now, you spelled Warner with a W-H up there, which is sometimes proper way.
Right,
and I want to, Marty, I did get smart and put it on my phone here, my YouTube there. You're writing down people watching today. Just wanted to say hello to Dave Stange, John the Beagle Dads there, Steve Jokums. We got some great models to show you besides this awesome picture of Steve Jokums there of his love his Forbidden Planet spaceship. William Whiting says hello. We've got Robert Greet. Thank you for joining us, Robert Greet. And Mark Thiel wants to know where Steve got his shirt.
Oh, okay. I don't know if we can do advertising. There's a wonderful website, and this shirt is outstanding. In case you're wondering, this is the very first time I've worn it.
Oh,
and
honored.
I'll have to get you the name of the company that I got it from.
You might put that out there for you there, Mark.
There you go. It's absolutely stunning.
And Robert Law's up in Dundee, Scotland.
Oh, okay.
All right. We'll probably hear from Cliff Watson in Pomona, Australia, because he's just waking up now. It's about 7 a.m.
Yeah, that's true,
over there. So thank you all for enjoying today's show. We've got some more show and tell to show you and some more memories of what it was like. But I also want, if you have not watched this movie, I have. It's a very interesting movie. They're walking on the moon with cameras on tripods and no
you don't have to worry about air.
You don't have to worry about air.
Yeah.
But what was one of the things that's going to happen at the launch of the Falcon Heavy today that was adapted from this movie?
Well, one of the things that happened with all launches is the countdown.
That's right.
And this was the first use of a countdown. What's odd is some of the American movies didn't have a countdown. They had a count up. The launch would be in 60 seconds. 1, 2, 3. When they got to 60, they launched it.
Yeah.
So this was a countdown, which to me makes a whole lot more sense.
Boy, at our from 1098, and that reminds me of our wonderful friend, the late Hugh Harris, who did many a program with us. And he sat there and he said he was paid to go to Europe to an air show in France, round trip with his wife, and all he was required to do was to go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, lift off. But this movie is worth you got to see this movie, The Woman on the Moon, Frau im Mond there. I loved it. And of course, Fritz Lang is famous for something else.
Go ahead.
But you tell us. You're the guest.
I'm trying to remember what it was off the bat. I remember this.
A cat. Felix the cat.
Felix the cat. That's right.
Yeah, Felix the cat is Fritz Lang's invention.
Okay, very good.
It's completely opposite of something serious like going to space. Yes, all right.
Okay, Moving a little bit further, now we're getting into the late 40s. World War II has just ended. Wireless World magazine. It's a technical periodical. A fellow named Arthur Charles Clarke decides to write a story in this very small publication, Wireless World, about theoretically, if you could put a satellite out at 22,300 miles above the equator, 3 of those satellites spaced 120 degrees apart, you would be able to have instant worldwide communications. Wow, wouldn't that be interesting? And in fact, when Clarke wrote a book a few years later on the exploration of space, right here on the frontis page, he comes up with a diagram of what that's, you have to open it up, there we go. He calls it the 24-hour orbit. Some people today, I know, want to refer to it as Clarke orbit. We call it synchronous orbit because it's synchronized with the Earth. The satellite that you put into space will take 24 hours to circle the Earth, and since the Earth circles itself in 24 hours, they're exactly synchronized. So as your town is moving along, the satellite is moving along with it. And that's the basis of our communication industry today. You can see some of the pictures of the exploration of space inside Clarke's book. And again, this book's from 1951. So this book, about 75 years old. And again,
Worth
Arthur
$100.
Yeah, there you go.
Anywhere you want to
And
find it.
and again, it's very important that you can see all these what was considered very, very far out ideas were now almost on the cusp of being real. We are still at this point in 1945, a dozen years away from the very first rocket launch, but people are looking ahead.
There's a cool picture. The Martian base.
Ideas of what would a base on Mars be like.
Yeah.
So again, you were looking ahead to all these possibilities. And Arthur Clarke became one of the 3 big science fiction writers of the last century. Arthur Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and Robert Heinlein are considered the big 3.
And we'll be talking more about Arthur Clarke and
And very shortly.
his awesome book there. But
now, this is one of my favorite stories that almost make you believe in time travel. And it's called Project Mars, a technical tale by this fellow named Wernher von Braun. Now, Wernher von Braun, again, rocket scientist, comes over here after the Second World War, and he starts writing a technical tale. Today we'd call it what we would call hard science fiction that pays attention to details and facts. So he has a whole Mars base set up, and this is the part that when you read it, it's absolutely astounding. And again, this was put out in 1949. Okay, so you're talking about 75 years ago. They're talking about how to set up this government on Mars. All right, which is pretty far in the future. Again, 1949. He said the Martian government would be directed by 10 men, the leader of whom will be elected by universal voting or suffrage, and a term of 5 years. And he will be called the Elon.
oh no!
Is
really?
that great?
The Elon?
Elon. He'd be called Elon.
1949.
1949. And for those people that are wondering about that,
Elon
Musk was not born until June 28, 1971. Now, I do have my theory on that.
Uh-huh.
And I think this is the only thing that explains that. Why in the world in 1949 you'd pull the name Elon out of the clear blue sky on the leader of Mars? And I came up with the idea. Maybe 20, 30 years from now, Elon Musk invents a time machine. He goes back to 1949, has a chat with Wernher von Braun, tells him how to design the Saturn V rocket. The Saturn V rocket is built. Von Braun is going to be thankful to Elon Musk for telling him how to do it. Elon, how can I thank you for that? He says, finish your book, make me the head guy on Mars. And so I'm sure von Braun finished the book, made Elon the head guy on Mars, and there you have it. I think that's the only way you can explain this.
I told you all it was going to be science fiction today.
There you go.
And Elon Musk has yet to invent a time machine. That is an interesting thing.
I said that's the only way I can explain that.
Marty, what do you think of that?
Beyond me.
Beyond me, Marty
I think
says.
that's just,
All right.
I think that's just great.
That's so interesting. And this
When-
book right here is it's not the full book you said. It's a little
Part of it, yeah,
part
the
of it
technical
there.
part.
But yeah, the great Werner von Braun, architect of the Saturn V rocket, wrote technical. This is there
That's
are
the technical book,
things
right? That
in
is
here.
the technical book, yeah.
Yeah, you got technical charts and graphs and real computations in here. Like I'm going to understand that calculus there or whatever. So
Now,
continue, my friend.
when he did the work, when he had this go out, again, he's still working for the United States government. He submitted the manuscript, like you saw there. You know, am I giving away anything I shouldn't be giving away? So the United States government wrote back. He said that it's cleared for publication by the Department of Defense early in 1950 because the material contained within is too futuristic to infringe on any classified matters.
Wow, that's interesting. Huh.
And in case you're wondering, the book was sent to 18 different publishers, and all 18 turned him down.
Huh.
So that would be the end of Werner von Braun.
And
Or
his-
maybe not.
No. Well, the end of his fiction writing there. So,
Okay,
well, here's a biggie for all you
Okay.
sci-fi fans.
now we're coming into 1950. Hollywood is going to get involved in science fiction in a real way. And the way is a movie called Destination Moon. No big bug-eyed monsters, no space aliens, just group of Americans, not the government. It's American industry. Different industrial leaders get together and decide we could go to the moon, explore what's there. And there's this team of 4 astronauts that go to the moon. It was the first movie to deal with the practical and engineering challenges of space travel. And it was using, again, private industry. Now, one of the most interesting things about the movie, if you look at the lower right-hand corner, you'll notice the astronauts have different colored spacesuits.
Yeah.
And what was the reason for that? And the answer was so you'd know who's who on the moon. One of the things NASA did during Apollo 11, when they were talking to the astronauts on the moon, they say, "Hey, could you do this or that?" Well, no, that's Buzz. He's over there. I'm over here. You couldn't tell the two from each other. So from Apollo 14 on, and that goes on to the current day on shuttle flights, you'd wear a red armband. The commander or the what they call EV1, the extravehicular activity 1, would wear a red band on his suit, so you know which guy you're talking to. They figured that out in 1950, and NASA must have missed that.
That is interesting. Yeah, that on 12, same way. Of course, we didn't have video.
It didn't have a camera, so it didn't matter. Yeah. So
But all right, Destination Moon.
again, 1950. Okay.
Now,
Now-
this is Marty's wheelhouse here.
Okay.
The radio.
The radio series. Now, what about the radio series? Almost everyone heard of folks like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, but that was back in the 30s. But that continued on. People say, well, why would it continue on? Well, everybody had a TV set. Well, it turns out not everybody had a TV set. So what I did is I looked these things up, Mark, and how many Americans actually had a TV set? You can't produce a lot of TV shows if nobody has TVs.
Mm-hmm.
In 1945, there were 140 million Americans. 10,000 had TV sets. That means 1 in every 14,000 people had a TV set.
1 in every 14,045. Right
In
after the war.
1948, 1 out of 100.
All right.
Still not very much to do a production. In 1950, almost 10%, 9%. By 1952, 1/3 of Americans nearly had a TV set. By 1953, half of America had a TV set. By 1954, that bumped up to almost 2/3. 1955, 75%. At the end of the decade, 9 out of 10 Americans had a TV set. But up until then, radio was the way you had entertainment. The family would get together, turn on the radio and listen. And so there were radio shows, lots of them. And another great thing is those radio shows I'm showing you here are available on the internet. You can just call up there's vintage radio apps that actually have these shows. I listen to them when I walk in the morning. And again, they're a lot of fun. And you can see the years that they were enacted. There was a lot of them in the 1930s, and then that went up into the 1950s, all the way up almost to 1960. So a lot of really interesting radio shows looking about the future. Some of them actually used the stories that science fiction writers. Just this morning, I listened to The Cool Green Hills of Earth, which is a Robert Heinlein story.
Huh.
And they have actors acting on these. Now, almost everybody is familiar with H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds when Orson Welles did the broadcast way back on Halloween, where the whole country was just mystified that the aliens really had landed on Earth. But radio was a major medium at the time before television. So this is the way a lot of the space programs that they had, were broadcast in the early 1950s, before a lot of people had TV.
One of the things that we've lost touch with was the fireside chats with President Roosevelt. Very popular. He would talk to the nation every Saturday, was it? Or Sunday, talk to him after church. And we're just enjoying all this nostalgia stuff back here. I love radio, mystery theater, and I'll find these science fictions. We got Dean Babcock, says hello from Illinois. Tom Celentano said, so interesting as always. Yes, Steve, always is interesting. Thank you.
Thank you
for all your support, Tom. And Anatomical Snuffbox says that they love watching our live streams. And that they've been in our museum about 15 years ago. Well, we're
That's
a lot
great.
different
Wow,
than we were
a lot bigger
15 years ago, for sure. But thank you all for chiming in on this wonderful program with Steve Agid. If you've been privileged to go out to the KSC Visitor Complex, you might catch Steve in the rocket garden talking about those rockets there, or you've introduced astronauts, that sort of thing out there. So, and where are we at, Logan, with the launch? We still go for launch?
We are. They actually said it. Checking on my app, they changed it to 70% go for the weather.
Oh, very good.
70% go for the weather.
And they changed the time to 5:26.
5:26. Thank you. I think we're going to need that extra 10 minutes.
I
on
think
our show.
what happened is I think some of the folks there are listening to the broadcast. Why don't you give us a few more minutes here?
That's right, because I'm not going to rush you. This is an awesome information, and I appreciate you spending a lot of time putting this together, because it shows, my friend.
All right, let's move along. All right, so now, as you saw on the last slide, by 1954, 2/3 of the American households had television sets. So now, space is going to become the object of television. And there's going to be a lot of space TV shows. Now, most of these are what we call the juveniles, which would be, you always know a juvenile show because they might have a whole bunch of astronauts on board, but there'd always be a kid in that rocket ship. And that's probably not going to happen. But if you want those kids to be in that audience, you better show one of those kids
Space Patrol.
in that. Space Patrol. Tom Corbett, Space Cadet. Rocky Jones, Space Ranger. Sky Marshal of the Universe. Now,
Commander Cody.
Commander Cody, yeah.
He was Tom Corbett. Big. That was a series of books. Very big, like a Nancy Drew
Same idea.
series of books for those of you who grew up in the 50s and 60s.
The Men into Space one, that was an adult show, and you can still see that on the just go on the internet and look up Men into Space
or something like that.
On 1959, and that program tried to be as realistic as it could for 1959. You have to remember, it's 2 years before the first person really is going into space. So things happen a lot faster in 1959 than they did in 1961. You can decide this afternoon we're going to go into space, drive out to the launch pad, you're set to go. So a lot of things are not quite exactly right, but they try to be as accurate as possible. But it's a wonderful series, Men into Space, and I'd recommend anybody that wants to just try it out for 1959. Granted, I love the music.
All right, I'll check that
out. It's great again for 1959. Again, keeping in mind it's 2 years before the first person is going to go into space in April 1961.
Mm-hmm. Space Command, I'm not familiar with there. That's our Space Command there. I know Commander Cody, but I hadn't.
Space Command is another one of the TV series. There was, like I said, there was a whole slew of these, the juvenile ones and the adult ones. I think Men into Space was probably the first. Now we go into space becoming more popular. You got the science fiction shows on TV. You got the radio series. You got the science fiction magazines. But you don't have the mainstream. The only people that are watching or reading the science fiction magazine are science fiction fans.
Mm-hmm.
The only ones that are watching the juvenile space things are the kids. The only ones that are watching the juvenile space TV shows. What about the moms and the dads? Well, science fiction is junk. You know, but science fiction is junk.
For kids.
For
It's
kids.
just
Yeah, it's
the
or something for
teenagers.
kids.
Yeah.
Mainstream. You're never going to break into the mainstream. Well, not so fast. That began in 1952. Collier's Magazine. Now, Collier's Magazine is a highly respected magazine. Been around since the 1890s. And it's a weekly publication, just like Life magazine. And if you look at the one in the upper corner of the slide here, man will conquer space soon. And that was considered quite the thing. Well, they put out a series of issues. I have one of them right here. The one you see on the slide is the official first issue. It was in March 1952, just a few months before I was born. But this is the October issue.
That one you
of
said you had
Collier's
framed
Magazine.
on your
That's
wall.
framed
there,
on the wall.
That is the classic.
But that is
Collier shot
that was the very beginning. And again, very, very shocking. But this is a Collier's Magazine from 1952 in October, talking about man landing on the moon. Would only be 17 years ahead. So they had landing craft. So this was an entire series. So now
Got to show you on the back of that.
Yeah. Now
Camel-
space, you have
camel-
advertising cigarettes.
Cigarettes.
But now space is
Probably get
definitely
arrested from YouTube for that.
right. Yeah. Well, it's but space is definitely becoming more mainstream because now you can consider Collier's Magazine. It doesn't get more mainstream than Collier's Magazine, but that's not enough. Wernher von Braun had a saying which I thought was great. He said, you know, how do you become successful in the space program? It's a paraphrase of Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin with the famous early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. What von Braun says you have to do is late to bed, early to rise, work like hell, and advertise. You've got to have people know what you're doing and how best to communicate with people. If we can go to the full screen again, that would be great.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Marty.
Now, if in the upper right of the slide, you see Wernher von Braun with an American icon, Walt Disney. Now, we've had TV, and Disney was going to broadcast in color. So not only is there TV, there is color TV. And there was a series of space shows put together with Wernher von Braun. So you had real science, real space shows. It was a series. And you had Tomorrowland in Disney. And this is in Disney in California. And right there is the Disney rocket. And the Disney rocket there was actually bigger than the Snow White Castle. Not the Cinderella Castle, but the Snow White Castle. And there it is. And you could take a trip to the moon. And you can see it was sponsored apparently by TWA on the top there.
Oh.
But the idea is that now science is coming into your living room on the Disney Channel. And Disney is a very, very widely shown television show. I mean, it's widely seen by people, very, very popular.
Wide World of Disney.
Wide
on,
World
I
of
think
Disney, yeah.
I think it was on at
think it
maybe
was
8
Sunday
o'clock.
nights, yeah,
and then
Sunday
on
night,
Sunday night.
yeah.
And then the Ed Sullivan Show
Right.
was right after it.
So you had a very big audience. And again, Wernher von Braun wasn't Wernher von Braun yet. Again, this is before the first satellite is going up. You're preparing people for this is coming. This is coming. Now, 1956. I know that I know you're rubbing your hands, but
Yeah.
I felt the same way. There was a wonderful movie called Forbidden Planet, 1956. Well, Forbidden Planet was going to be a new space film. Not a lot of, and no big creatures and whatnot. It was another one of the adult space films like Destination Moon would be. but much better special effects. It had a lot of different things that were brought to the media that had never been done before. It was the first time a spacecraft traveled faster than light. You know, the Star Trek Enterprise did that all the time. This is the first spacecraft that, in fact, looked like a flying saucer. In fact, as our broadcast began, you saw that model of this spacecraft called the C-57D. That was, and there is a model of it right there. So it looked like these Americans were flying in what looked like a flying saucer. The robot in the movie, called Robbie the Robot, it was used in things like Lost in Space and other movies. It was used in The Twilight Zone. But Robbie was about 10% of the budget of the entire movie Forbidden Planet. Now, on the first day of shooting, they took the cast out to see the model of the C-57D, the big flying saucer. And Anne Francis, who was the female star of the movie, said that they try to impress upon everybody that, this is not, a kiddie show. We want you to take this seriously. And, she smiled. They went out and put him on the stage. The model was well over 100 feet. It is giant size. They said her and Leslie Nielsen, the male lead, just looked at it and said, wow, this is going to be something special. And indeed, Forbidden Planet really is.
Walter Pidgeon
was in there.
The
was
father,
scientist, yeah.
And Leslie Nielsen, those of you that know him in sort of slapstick comedies like Airport and stuff like that.
Very serious.
Very young in this. If you've not seen Forbidden Planet,
you really missed something. If you haven't seen it.
You can see it on Roku for free. I watch it every year at least once, and I have the 50th anniversary DVD and little Robbie robots. I'm eat up with the Krell and the Forbidden Planet.
We can go to full screen again.
Yes,
I want
sir.
you to look at the bottom right. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to move over a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see some of the Disney artwork. Let's see if we can...
Marty might move that a little bit.
There you go, Marty. There we go. Much better.
Wait,
much better.
Hold on to my seat, Marty.
If you look carefully at the bottom right, you'll see the three figures walking along. This is inspecting... Yeah. You could look at the superimposition here. Again, this is, you can see the Disney artists.
Still special effects that stand today, don't they?
And again, pretty well for something that's 1956. So these animators that did these scenes, you could actually see three members of the crew of the ship walking on that big pathway. It was supposed to be hundreds of levels deep within the planet.
20 miles in either direction.
Of Altair 4. Yeah. And so these special effects were considered... just groundbreaking. And again, 1956.
This reminds me of one of the Star Wars scenes where they fight Obi-Wan and
with the lasers
and fights the Darth Vader to death there.
But again, Darth Vader, that's 20 years in the future.
Yeah.
From this. Okay, I think we could put us back where we
can leave us there. For
okay, we can do that. That's fine. Then came another groundbreaking one. That was 2001: A Space Odyssey. This was very controversial when it came out because it was unlike anything that anybody had ever seen before. 2001: A Space Odyssey. People go into one of two categories. They absolutely love it. They absolutely hate it. That's it. Nobody felt so about this movie. Tried to be absolutely as scientific as they could be. They had designers and things come from all the different agencies. They had incredible graphics. In fact, this is something rather unusual. People, I'm sure almost everybody's familiar with Life magazine. Well, the front cover of this magazine showed King Tut.
What year is that?
This is 1968 in April. Now, what's unusual about it is King Tut is being displayed. But if you go inside the magazine, not a 1 or 2, but a 12-page spread on this brand new movie coming out in April 1968 called 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was unlike anything that had ever been done before. If you look at everything from computers playing chess to computers starting to think for themselves to spacecraft that'll be landing on the moon, and again, all of this from 1968, looking ahead 33 years. Space stations that are occupied by people of all different countries. It wasn't until 1998 that we started living on board the International Space Station. Up till then, you had Americans living in an American station. You had Russians living in a Mir space station. So I think that's the end of the article right there. But
Well, I found my favorite TV dinner.
There you go.
Salisbury steak there from Swanson. You had a few
Way
of those,
back.
I'll bet.
Absolutely. But the idea is that a major magazine like Life magazine would actually donate 12 pictures in full color of this brand new movie, and super technical and paying attention to detail.
You were saying how some people loved it, some people hated it.
Yeah.
Famously, Rock Hudson
That
walked out of it in the middle of it, mumbling, "What the hell
is this about?
What the hell's this about?"
Yeah.
And God took his date and said, "We're getting out of here, and I need a drink."
But again, if you stayed for the whole thing, then of course there were books written about it, and it was all based on a short story that Arthur Clarke wrote. I have the magazine way back when. It was called The Sentinel.
That's
the
called The Sentinel, yeah.
Yeah, and The Sentinel, except in the book, the object doesn't look like a standing up a deck of cards. It looked like the monolith was actually like a triangle, like a pyramid shaped thing found on the moon. So what the premise of the movie is at the very beginning of the movie you see monkeys, and this monolith standing up. And the monkeys start touching it, and whatnot. A screeching sound is heard, a signal is sent out, and nothing goes on again until 2001, where they discover, buried underneath the lunar surface in the crater Tycho, another monolith. Same thing, the crew goes down there, they touch it, very similar to what the monkeys are doing, and a signal is sent out to the planet Jupiter. Now, in the book, it's Saturn, but in the movie it's to Jupiter. And the idea is, what it is aliens from the way distant past want to know when mankind is smart enough to go to the moon. And when they are, we want to know about it. So it's like an alarm clock. When you get to the moon, it sends out that signal, hey, humanity has reached this stage of development. And that's kind of like the idea that you can get by the end of the movie. So very intense movie. I think the first words of the movies were not even spoken till about 30 minutes into the movie, something like that.
But what was spoken was the red dot above your head there as the HAL, HAL, the computer. And, I'm thinking about Hal the computer and what he did, and I'm not going to spoil the plot, but then I'm thinking, Steve, artificial intelligence.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at how I hate that Grammarly on my emails. I mean, just artificial intelligence is really coming into our lives big time, and I'm not sure I like it.
Well, I don't want to spoil it for everybody, but essentially, when you leave the movie, Hal is the bad guy.
Yeah.
Hal did something really bad.
Yeah.
If you look at the sequel to
computer,
the book, right,
yeah.
Hal the computer, which stood for heuristically programmed algorithmic computer, something that continuously learns. But Arthur Clarke wrote a sequel called 2010. Odyssey 2.
He sure did.
Which explains why Hal acted the way he did. Now, you program computers, but computers are only as good as that programmer. And one of the things in the program conflicted with another thing in the program. And the only way to resolve it was for Hal to do what he did. So now we learn, that's why that happened. And all of a sudden, poor Hal, that you hated at the end of the movie, now you can understand why things worked out the way they did. Okay. Now move ahead. Now, Star Trek. If you were growing up in the 1960s, Star Trek was the show on TV. And talk about inspiration. When Star Trek was a TV series, that was from September 1966 to June of 1969. It went off the air about a month before the moon landing. 79 episodes in the original Star Trek. Well, this space shuttle is going to be rolled out for the first time. And this is Space Shuttle Enterprise. It never flew into space, wasn't supposed to fly into space. It would do the descent and landing test. It would be dropped off a 747. The crew would try to land it so the astronauts could become familiar with what it takes for landing. And the name of this craft is going to be called Constitution. Well, the Star Trek fans decided that they would write NASA and said, we want you to rename it. And well, Constitution's the name, and that's it. Well, thousands and upon thousands of people wrote in, and Constitution got renamed Enterprise after the show. And so, for the rollout ceremonies, several of the cast members, all the way, if you look all the way to the left, is the NASA administrator Tom Paine, standing next to DeForest Kelly or Dr. McCoy, George Takei, Sulu. Next to him, we have Jimmy Doohan or Scotty, Nichelle Nichols, Uhura, followed by Leonard Nimoy, followed by Gene Roddenberry, followed by, each of the different members of the Star Trek, Walter Koenig as Chekhov. All the members of Star Trek cast are there. And it's how the Star Trek fans were so closely aligned to the show. They wanted to see something and actually try to make something that was fake something real. So Enterprise became the Space Shuttle Enterprise. It made the first of the landing tests. And the approach and landing tests were done by the astronauts that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, Fullerton, Hayes, Engel, and Truly.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yes. And where can we see Enterprise today?
Today, Enterprise is in the Intrepid Space Museum in New York Harbor.
Yes, that's on the bucket list.
Now, let's move ahead just a little bit. Star Trek was just such a big influence, I had to use 2 slides for it. In 1966, when Star Trek was starting, black actress Nichelle Nichols played the communications officer, Lieutenant Uhura. Next to her, you see a lady named Mae Jemison. She was watching Star Trek and was inspired by Nichelle Nichols. And Mae Jemison flew into space on Space Shuttle Mission 47, the United States-Japanese space flight. And she said she was fully inspired by that. Now, Star Trek paid her back in 1993, where that same Mae Jemison ended up being on Star Trek The Next Generation, in the episode called Second Chances. Now, as far as Nichelle Nichols goes, there's a story that she always talks about. There's a wonderful movie on streaming called Women in Motion. It's something that she put together about her contributions to the real space program, something you definitely want to see. NASA came to her, and this is for the selection of the first big astronaut class. This is the 1978 class of astronauts. It will be the 8th different selection group of astronauts. They were going to be the first women going into space, the first black astronauts going into space, etc., and so on. And they put out a list for applications. You didn't have to be a pilot anymore. They were looking for scientists. They were looking for engineers. Anybody could apply. And they were getting very, very, very few applications. They asked Nichelle Nichols, can you go out and go to some of these areas where people just don't think they're part of the space program? So she formed an organization called Women in Motion. Now, how did she see her role? This is one of the stories she tells over and over again. And I met her the first time in 1976, nearly 50 years ago. And she told the story then, and I've heard it many times since. At the end of the first year of Star Trek, the set was visited by a big Star Trek fan named Dr. Martin Luther King. And she told him that, she's been on one season, that she's pretty much had enough. You know, all she does is say hailing frequencies open. That's pretty much about it. And so what's the point? And he said, well, he looked at me and he says, you can't leave this show. I said, what do you mean? I'm an actress. I'm a singer. He says, no. You have to show just by being there that black people are part of the future as well. You don't realize the influence you'll have with people. And she decided right then and there, okay, just for him, I'll stay on the show. Then NASA decided to have her help recruit, and she indeed did a lot of that recruitment. Again, watch that show, Women in Motion. It was filmed in 2019, telling her entire story of what it took to do all of this and get people that are not normally associated with this program interested in space, interested in the future.
Fabulous story there, absolutely. Nichelle Nichols passed away a few years ago, but boy, she was out there in public all the time and enjoying it in there. So this is very interesting slide here.
Okay, the next slide, people think of the devices they had on Star Trek that everybody laughed at, and one was called a communicator, and of course we have now the flip phone.
Right.
The Bluetooth.
The best
The,
one.
the
Absolutely.
Bluetooth was a funny thing because the first time it never occurred to me when I was watching a young child in one of our presentations. They looked up and saw an episode of Star Trek that they were showing, and the kid looked up and said, "That's the funniest Bluetooth I ever saw." And I never thought of what she had in her ear was, yeah, probably a Bluetooth device. Patient monitors. When you looked in Dr. McCoy's sick bay, oh man, he just had that table and every one of the functions of the human body is right behind him. How nice is that? Well, certainly the hospitals of the 1960s didn't have that.
Right.
Now they do. And then finally, since COVID hit, people say they're not familiar with scanners at all. Well, I can guarantee almost everybody over the last few years, one point or other, somebody aimed one of those guns at your head to tell you what your temperature is. Well,
we bought one here at the museum to take your temperature before you came in.
And again, you probably didn't give credit to Dr. McCoy at all.
No, we did.
Okay, there you go.
No, we did.
We still on schedule for the launch at
Marty's got
we have less than 20 minutes.
Falcon Heavy launch.
We're almost done.
That's right. This is very interesting stuff
now
here.
You know, when people see Elon Musk is a very, very self-motivated man. Came to Canada after he left his home in South Africa. Of course, he formed PayPal, made money, and of course invested in the next thing. And he takes the money he made, invests in his next big project. Well, one question, the Marvel Comics group came up with a guy named Iron Man. Iron Man came out on May 1st, 1968. That's Iron Man issue number 1. He appeared in magazines before that, but he had his own magazine starting in 1968. Now, when they started making the movie, Robert Downey, who would be the actor, said he had no idea how to approach Iron Man on the big screen. And one of the people said, you probably need to talk to a real-life Iron Man. That would be Elon Musk. And so he decided to go and meet Musk. And after that, he said, yep, that is who it's going to be. That I'm going to portray him as an Elon Musk, as Tony Stark, Iron Man. Now, again, that's 1968. Elon Musk is not born until June 28, 1971. So when people say he was the inspiration for Iron Man was out and going 3 years before he was born.
The movie inspiration for him.
And who was he inspired by? Well, Elon Musk was inspired by Arthur C. Clarke, 2001, Isaac Asimov, and he formed these companies that are all thinking ahead. Tesla in cars, SpaceX with rockets. In fact, we're waiting for a SpaceX rocket launch right now.
Falcon Heavy.
The Twitter, which is now, of course, X, and Neuralink. So all these devices, one after the other, Iron Man or Tony Stark, or in our case, inspired by Elon Musk, to do all these things looking at the future.
Now, Steve Agid, he was so inspired that where does the Falcon 9 name come from?
Okay, Falcon 9 came from the next slide.
Glad I asked.
He named it after the Millennium Falcon. And again, Star Wars was one of his formative films. And I thought that was just great. So how you give back, something that shapes your career, it's just one of those things you want to do. So that every time you see that link between inspiration and reality. Now, let's move on. Now, for those that think that, well, it's kind of silly, inspiration, is that really all that important? One of the first exhibits you'll see at the Kennedy Space Center, when you enter, you'll see the rocket garden, but right next to it, just to the left, is Heroes and Legends. Talks about the very early days of the space program. When they opened that up, they decided, what do people around the world, what do people that are interested in space, what do they have in common? They came out with 9 different things that people have in common. One, people that go into space have to be confident. They have to be selfless. They have to be principled. They have to be courageous. They have to be passionate about what they're doing. They have to be curious. They have to be disciplined. They have to be tenacious and hold on to things. But one of the most important things is you have to be inspired. So there are 9 individual kiosks with examples of inspiration. So looking at this one right here, the Inspired exhibit, I took a close-up. You see the French edition of Jules Verne, From the Earth to the Moon, right there in the hallowed halls of the Kennedy Space Center. The early science fiction magazines on display as well. The lunch boxes, the comic strips, the programs and shows from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and such, all inspired a generation, just like the generation today might have been inspired by Star Wars. So again, inspiration on display at the Kennedy Space Center, looking ahead to the future.
It's a great slide to put in there.
Yeah, the idea is that, again, it's the idea is that first of all, you got to get people's attention to inspire them to be more than they were before. And finally, I think one of the nicest ways to end it is by looking at the future. A fellow named Kettering, Charles Kettering, said in 1939, people say, why do you think so much about the future? Why do you worry about the future? Why do you do this? And he was a General Motors head of research. And he says, I'm interested in the future because I expect to spend the rest of my life there. So think about that tonight. When you're talking about the future, what is it going to be like? What are you going to make for yourself? Think of that now, because that's where you're going to spend the rest of your life.
Great
Okay.
program, Steve Agid. We really appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
We got a Falcon Heavy launch coming up here in about 15 minutes that we can still get to. Want to thank Steve Jokums for this beautiful background there. Thank you, Marty. There's his slide there. And he not only has this Forbidden Planet space cruiser, C-57D. There's Steve's Moonliner, which was Tomorrowland in Disney, you talked about, Steve. Von Braun's Disney ship called RM1 from the hands of Steve Jokums there. He's got this gorgeous Destination Moon model there. And Stanley, there's his array of Stanley Kubrick's models in there. Steve Jokums' business, by the way, the Lake County Spaceport does decals for all these. Who doesn't want that Enterprise lit up so beautifully? A couple neat shuttles in the background there, Steve, caught my eye. And lastly, there's your slide of the Lake County Spaceport, adding him to our show today. Steve's a great financial contributor with us to space through modeling.
There you
at
go.
Astra de Fermi there. So thank you so much, Steve. You worked several hours putting that together,
Absolutely.
and I'm grateful for that, that you spent that. That is a great program, and now you all know some of the inspiration behind today. Some of that's just incredible. Elon Musk, maybe he will build a time machine.
You never know.
So, well, until tomorrow, when I didn't put a slide up there, we have got Mikey Haddad is going to talk about his involvement with Sally Ride on her 2 missions. And then Mikey, who I think, Mikey was involved with the Rogers Commission report with Sally Ride. So kind of a personal stories from Mikey Haddad, who wrote a book on payloads in the shuttle, Level 4 NASA engineer. We always love you having Mikey on the program here. So I'm going to go out. I don't think I've given you a Rocket Hobo patch from Ozzy Osbourne.
Actually, you had the last time I was here.
Okay, well, then I'm going to give you one of Steve Jokums' patches.
Well, that was great.
Okay.
Okay,
Did
I
you like
that.
one of his
Absolutely.
patches? All right.
Okay.
Well, we appreciate everybody watching today. Hope you come back. Tell your friends to watch us on YouTube, this fabulous program that Steve Agid put together, and hope to see you tomorrow with Mikey Haddad and his tales about Sally Ride, all to bridge the space between us. Thank you, my friend. That was awesome.
All righty.